Hebrews 7. Anybody feel like reading?
You maybe want to read this time, Andrew?
Just looking to see where there's a good place to stop.
Looks like 10, probably.
All right.
Or whatever you think.
All right. Hebrews 10, Hebrews 7. For this Melchizedek, king of Salem, priest of the Most High God, met Abraham returning from the defeat of the kings and blessed him. And to him, Abraham allotted a tenth of everything. Translated, his name means first, king of righteousness. Then it also means king of Salem, that is, king of peace. He is without father, without mother, without genealogy, having neither beginning of days nor end of life. But like the Son of God, he continues a priest for all time. But see how great this man was to whom the patriarch David gave a tithe of the finest plunder. And those of the sons of Levi who received the priestly office have a mandate according to the law to collect a tithe from the people, that is, from their fellow countrymen, although they too come from the loins of Abraham. But this man, who does not trace his descent from them, received tithes from Abraham and blessed the one who had the promises. It is without any dispute that the person of lesser status is blessed by the one of greater status. In the one case, mortal men receive tithes, but in the other case, by one of whom it is testified that he lives. And it could be said that Levi himself, who receives tithes, paid tithes through Abraham, for he was still in the loins of his ancestor when Melchizedek met Abraham. Stop there. Thoughts?
What is
It's saying verse 8's a little confusing to me. Anybody kind of have shed some light on that one at all?
So this man who does not trace his descent from them received tithes from Abraham and blessed the one who had the promises. Or that's sorry, that's verse 6, verse 8. The one case mortal man received tithes. But
Yeah, the version I'm reading says in the one case, a tenth is collected by men who die. But another case, it is collected by the one who is said to be living.
is Melchizedek the one who's living?
Oh, that's what I'd
One
say.
one would think, yeah.
Yeah.
the Young's literal says, and here, indeed, men who died do receive tithes, and there, who is testified to that he was living.
I mean,
Well,
is it just saying that everyone's going to die, tithes too? And then I don't get it. What's the difference between the one living tithing and the one dying tithing? One receives and one, I don't know.
Oh, men
so
that die receive tithes. Those are the priests. You give tithes to the priests. So the priests receive the tithes, but they're mortal, so they die.
but Melchizedek does not die. We just read that he has neither beginning of days nor end of life.
Right.
So what's the significance? I mean,
Well, if Melchizedek's still alive at the time the Hebrew writer's writing, and Melchizedek was alive back in the days of Abraham in Genesis, he'd be like 4,000 years old.
Does that mean we're supposed to tithe to Jesus still?
Well, there are other scriptures that talk about giving an offering on the first day of the week, but I don't know if you would call it a tithe or not. I mean, it doesn't give like a percentage. Like I know Old Testament was 10%. There's no percentage or anything in the New Testament that I'm aware of.
Doesn't it just say give generously?
Yeah, as far as
It's
I
more of
know.
like an offering, just like free will
Yeah.
offering, I guess.
Yeah.
You'd say.
Mm-hmm.
This is kind of somewhat related, but irrelated. You know how we were talking about Christ's sacrifice, you know, how great it was or how great it wasn't, however you want to look at it. I was looking at the parable of the lady that gave, like, you know, she only gave a little portion, but God considered that more than everyone else had gave because she gave from her poverty.
Yep.
So even if God or Jesus, whatever, was only buried for 3 days, God could look at it totally differently.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's other verses that talk about God sees things not as man sees things, you know, which could also explain why you could have the 1,000 years in the book of Revelation be a 40-year period on earth, but that gets into other stuff.
I thought it was interesting that he was the King of Peace. You know, I mean, to me, isn't that Christ's nickname too?
Well, Isaiah 9:6, right, talks about uh, Prince of Peace, mighty God, everlasting Father, wonderful
Did
counselor.
you ever look into that being a
No,
variant?
I never saw the different variants. I still haven't seen
And
them.
what are you talking about?
Isaiah
The
9:6.
everlasting Father.
Yeah, there's a variant in between like the Masoretic and the Septuagint.
What's the difference, or what's the difference between them?
Hold on, let's see. It doesn't call them. I don't think the phrase. Hold on, if I remember. Hold on, look it
I
up
don't
real
think the
quick.
phrase everlasting Father is in there, which would make complete sense,
Hold on.
I think.
I know this is off the topic, but let's see. Hold on.
King of righteousness and King of peace. That's a pretty important, I would think. The fact that both of those are included in the guy's name.
It's also interesting that justice comes before peace, seems like, in the order of things, or righteousness, however you want to look at it. Mine says
Yeah.
King of Justice.
Well, can you really have peace without justice?
Right. That's what I was just thinking, you know, in 70 AD or whatever, you know, that war, justice came and then peace was supposed to be established after that.
I think Zach pointed this out before, and when we were talking about chapter 6, but I think Melchizedek is only in 3 books of the Bible. Is that right? Genesis, Psalms, and Hebrews.
Mm-hmm.
There's no really record of how he showed up on the scene. Kind of weird that Abraham just like, okay, I'm going to give you a tenth, and there's no history behind this guy.
Who do you
I
think he
wonder,
is?
I wonder if he's in any other books outside the canon.
Yeah, it's Jasher chapter 16.
Did he?
Yeah, and it actually mentions. I'll pull it up and read it to you. Um, I'll pull out that where that remember I was showing you that Acts 29 thing.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I have Josh, and I just remember 16. Um, if I remember, I haven't looked at this in probably like 6 years. Yeah, I got it right here. Starting in verse 11, it says, "And Adonai-Zedek," which would be kind of like the Hebrew version, I guess you could say, like Adonai, like the Lord, and then of righteousness, King of Jerusalem. The name was Shem. Went out with his men and met Abram and his people with bread and wine, and they remained together in the valley of the kings. And Adonizedek blessed Abram, and Abram gave him a tenth from all that he had brought from the spoil of his enemies. And Adonizedek was the priest before Elohim or God, and all the kings of Sodom and Amorah who were there with the servants approached Abram and begged of him to return them their servants whom he had made captive, and took unto himself all their property. So like that's kind of like the same battle previously. Here comes Shem. It's interesting. It mentions Shem by name, and that it's him. He is the Melchizedek figure that we see in Genesis chapter 14. You guys remember watching, what was the YouTube channel? Tour to the tribes, or his name was Matthew Nolan, or not was, his name is Matthew Nolan. You guys remember the Hebrew Roots people in the group here?
Was he on
Yeah.
I think his
Shabbat Night Live and stuff like
not
that here and there?
no.
No,
Let me see.
okay.
Torah to the tribes. Yeah, that's his YouTube channel. Torah to the tribes. His name is Matthew Nolan. And he has like wow, it's crazy that these videos are 8 years old. But I remember when he was making those videos, he went to this and was showing through the book of Hebrews, through the book of Jasher, and certain things of that nature, that who this Melchizedek is, that it was Shem, and that there is a sequential order to the Melchizedek priesthood, which started with Abraham, or which started with Adam, and it was a succession. I know we didn't get to verse 12, right, in Hebrews 7.
No, we stopped at 10.
Yeah, so I'm gonna just throw this in there too. In Hebrews 12, actually verse 11, it says, if therefore perfection had been reached by the Levitical priesthood by which the law was enacted for the people, what further need was there for another priest to rise after the order of Melchizedek? Otherwise, scriptures would have said that he would be after the order of Aaron. So this guy would also teach that, obviously, because there is a sequential order of Aaron. Aaron, you have his sons Nadab and Abihu, and then those die, and then you have his other children. It goes on, so forth and so forth, until the ending of the Levitical line. So the same word for order is used for this order of Melchizedek. So that's where he went. I mean, I know this is a more of a Hebrew roots kind of topic, I guess you could say.
Do you remember? Do you
I
remember
guess
how did he explain Shem having no father or mother?
that's what I was
Yeah,
just
so
wondering.
yeah. So the reason that was stated there, and how they still say it was Shem, is that there was no genealogy written about that order of Melchizedek.
But we
Yes, their
have
names are written. Yeah, their names are written in the Bible, but not as that particular order. It's kind of like you can have your name written in a book, but like if your title of president of this company was never written, there's technically no record of Andrew being the president of Acts 238 Ministries or whatever.
Yeah, but this seems to
That's pretty
be
much how they get away with
genealogy,
it.
father and
okay,
mother, yeah.
but so
That's how
okay.
they just say it was nothing's written down.
Right.
Obviously, when you actually look at the text, you're like, wait a second here. This person is not a human.
Yeah, well, especially if what we were just talking about. The first thing Rob brought up was verse 8. Mortal men receive tithes, but in the other case, by one of whom it is testified that he lives. The one who lives is Melchizedek in this, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, never dies.
So if Melchizedek's still alive at the time the Hebrew writer's writing, then he's 4,000 years old, which
Well,
can't be.
the reason is because it's an order. It's not one. It's like the order of Levi, the order of Aaron. It's not like Aaron is still alive in the first century. It's just kind of like the president. Like you can say the president of the United States, but there's like a sequential order. You can go from the first president to the however number, like 250 something or whatever, however many presidents there are. So that's kind of like how the thought is there, is that it's
So
not just because again, Shem obviously died. So Shem got the priesthood from Noah, and Noah got it from his father, and then it goes until to Adam. Adam was the first priest in their mind.
um,
Yeah, it just seems contrary to verse 8, like
hmm.
Andrew said.
So, okay. So also he doesn't have a beginning, no beginning of days or end of life. They just, how do they explain that part?
I mean, I'm not 100% sure. Like I said, the beginning, I guess, would be God was the first one, and then he gave that order to Adam, and then it just went down the line. It never stopped. It never necessarily had a beginning because God was the first priest, and then because he created Adam to have that relationship, he bestowed upon him that exact order of creation of that priesthood to Adam, and then Adam to his son, to his son, to his son, to his son. And then
How
again, I
would,
mean, again, one of the
how,
biggest things is because you have Jasher. If you
how
take
would that,
Jasher as canon, then
how
that's
would that
the
be any
answer.
different though than what God did with the Levites?
Well, the Levites was something that was added. It wasn't
Well,
supposed to be
what,
a
I mean,
there
I mean,
wasn't supposed to be a Levitical priesthood
Adam
at
was
all.
also added. Like Adam hasn't always existed.
No, but I guess that priesthood of the firstborn of all God's people, I guess you could say, that's yes, that came into existence when Adam was created, but I guess in their mind that God, Yahweh, being that priest, creating Adam, allowing him to take part of that priesthood, a part of that eternal covenant, I guess, or that eternal promise or whatever. And then that there's a sequential order to that God allowed men to bestow upon the firstborn of
So,
their
that's,
children.
so you're saying they think that Shem is the one who's the king of righteousness and the king of peace.
Yeah, because it's like they would say it's like a literal place. Like it's because it says the king of Salem, so it's kind of like, does that mean just like of peace, like Isaiah 9, like the Prince of Peace, or is it like an actual place called Salem, like Jerusalem, like that? There's that play on word there. Um, you know,
Is this
that's
the
kind of
only
like the idea.
is this the only time that this is king of Salem? Is that the only time? It's one other time. It's both in Hebrews 7. It's right here.
Yeah, so this is what I said the last time when I was on here. I believe that it is interesting that there is only two mentionings of this particular priesthood by name in the entire Old Testament, and it's just like in passing. You just see Genesis 14 and then boom, Psalm 110. Like it's nothing like in depth. But then you get to the book of Hebrews and it's just like all this information. You're like, wait a second.
Psalm
But
100.
again,
Psalm 110 is about the Messiah, though, right?
yeah. So it's kind
No.
of just like you have this random Genesis chapter 14 thing. But again, what I'm talking about is what a lot of people in the Hebrew roots movement that accept these other biblical book or quote unquote biblical books like Jasher or Jubilees and things of that nature, that it does allow for this particular type of interpretation to hold some type of weight because you don't have to guess. You don't have to be like, man, who is this person? You go, oh, well, God told us who it was in Jasher. So you just go, boom, there's my answer. But
Okay, that's what you're saying.
yeah.
I know an argument that I've heard some people use who say that it's not about Jesus, as they say in verse 3, where it says, but like the Son of God. I've heard people argue or try to use the argument that, well, it says like. It doesn't say he is him. It says that he's like him, right? They use the like
Mm-hmm.
argument. But I always, in my mind, that's not a very strong argument because Daniel 7, 13 and 14 is one like Son of Man. And I don't know anybody who believes Jesus is the Messiah that would think that Daniel 7 is not about Jesus, even though it says like Son of Man.
Yeah. Doesn't it
So,
also say that in chapter 2, is it? No, when are they thrown into the fire? Chapter 7, 5 or something?
uh,
Wherever
well,
they're thrown into the fire, doesn't it say
three,
that they're one that appears
I
like the
think
Son of Man?
three maybe. I
What is it?
think it's chapter 3. Daniel's in the lions den, chapter 6. I think they're thrown in 3 maybe. been a while since I've read Daniel.
Yeah, me too.
All right.
Yeah, you're right. 3.
I mean, also the whole, when you think about the whole context of what the book of Hebrews is about, it's about the supremacy of Jesus. I mean, that would also make sense to show that, to argue that Jesus is greater and superior to Abraham, since the Jews are all about, they were all about Abraham's our father, right? And,
Yeah.
Levitical and all. So it's just, it just seems like another way of showing here that Jesus is greater than Abraham. He's greater than Levi, the Levites, and all that. So
It also can, somewhere it says don't get into genealogy debates. If Jesus or Melchizedek has no genealogy per se, then there is no debate. Your faith is in Christ.
yeah, I mean, you've already got the genealogies that you need to show that he was a true historical figure in Matthew 1 and Luke 3. Goes back to Abraham and David and goes back to Adam, Matthew and Luke's account, the genealogy of Jesus.
Everyone does.
Does anybody got any other thoughts on the first 10 verses here?
Verse 10 is pretty interesting. For he was yet in his father's loins when Melchizedek met him. So he meets him before he's even created, almost in a sense.
Yeah, a long time before he was born too.
Levi?
Yeah, Levi's just inside of.
Yeah, what is that? It's like four. What is that? 400, 300, 400 years later.
Maybe not that long, because Levi is his his great grandson.
Levi was
Yeah, it's his great grandson because it's Jacob's 12 boys. So Jacob is the grandson of Abraham, so it would be great grandson.
but that would have been, well, what, maybe 100,
Maybe like 80 years,
100 years, 150 years on.
Maybe.
Okay. Point is, Levi came after.
Yeah, and it's fascinating. It's fascinating that you kind of have like this idea, like how in the world can he be inside of Abraham? Like,
Mm-hmm.
is it
because you're not whole
physically?
yet. You haven't been combined with the mother.
Yeah, but I mean, like, yeah, like that's the thing. Like, is it inside the male sperm? Like, is it just like this? I don't know that. So I don't know if that's like literal
I think the
or.
male, if I'm not mistaken, determines what the sex will be. So maybe that's why it gets slight preference.
Yeah, I don't know.
I could be
That's
mistaken
a
on that.
little bit above my.
Not the
That's a little bit above
biology
my pay
expert.
grade. Yeah, I don't know.
Um,
But other than that, I really don't. I mean, obviously, the biggest thing here is who is this person? I take the position that it's Jesus.
would make sense.
I know.
I think in the next verses we're going to look at that potential comparison.
I mean, like I said, it makes sense given the whole context of what the book is mainly about anyway. Showing Jesus is superior to everything, anyone and everyone, everything.
I mean, why even bring up a guy from
Yeah,
thousands of years ago if there's not some type of correlation?
yeah, that's what I was thinking.
Did you guys talk about like the law they're talking about? Are they talking about the giving of a tenth? I mean, is this saying since that earthly priesthood that received a tenth of the tithes that's not necessary anymore? I mean, what's the law? Is it talking about that law?
Well, it's going to start talking about the law, I think, in verse 11 and 12.
11.
Like we're about to get to it, but
Is it-
but,
In
but
verse 5, look at verse 5. So verily that they are the sons of Levi who receive the office of the priesthood, have a commandment to take tithes. So I'm just wondering, does this mean there
Yeah,
is no more
if you
commandment
remember,
of
because if you remember
giving?
in
Uh-huh.
you got to remember in the Old Testament, all 12 tribes had a portion of the land. They were able to live and reap and harvest and do whatever they needed to, but they had to pay tithes because Levi didn't they didn't get a portion of the land.
That's
Their
right.
portion was like the center tabernacle temple. So they lived off of the tithes that was given by all the other tribes. So there
Yeah,
was a
and the
law that they
portion
had to yeah, so the
was the
law was
Lord,
that they
don't we
had to
say?
give, yeah, they had to give to the Levi because that's how Levi got to eat and survive. Because
Right.
that
didn't
was the law.
Manasseh and Ephraim
That's
fall into that
right.
too? Didn't they make up one of the tribes?
Yeah, they
Manasseh.
were the tribe of Joseph, or it kind of like commingled sometimes. But Levi, I mean, again, according to the law, that's
Well,
verse 5.
now I'm thinking about a verse. Uh, hey Andrew,
Mhm. Yep.
the verse where it talks about dang it, now it's fleeting away out of my brain. It talks about they will be when they come into the promised land. Okay, so when they come into their inheritance, they will live in a land, or they will live in houses that they did not build. They will eat of vineyards that they did not plant. In other words, they're
Mhm.
going to reap,
That's
reap,
Isaiah.
reap a harvest that they didn't even do the toiling of working for.
Rob is
Right?
Isaiah.
Yeah, it's
Because I think that they're
Isaiah.
going to,
I mean, it almost
they
sounds
would
like
have.
5, I
this.
think.
It almost sounds like you become, as the priest, you become the recipient of the tithes, not that you become, not that you necessarily have to be the tither.
Yeah, no. So remember, the tithes. God doesn't need your money. God didn't need the offerings of the first fruits. He didn't need that stuff. All the food, all the animals that were sacrificed, that was literally dinner for the family of Levi. That's what they ate.
Right.
That was
But
theirs.
they
Because
didn't
if you were a
necessarily,
tribe of Judah, if you were the tribe of Judah and your family owned a cattle, a bunch of goats or whatever, all you would do is take a tenth of what you had of your harvest, give it to Levi. You're giving it to God, but then God's, it went to Levi. That was their inheritance. It was, but they never owned anything. They never got to, it was kind of
yeah,
like a curse in a way that they never had anything that was theirs, but they got to eat off of everybody else because they were
I'm
working
thinking
for
of another
Yahweh.
scripture where is there a scripture where it says that their inheritance is the Lord Himself? Like that, because that's what they were to do, right? They were to service, their service was unto the Lord, and basically the Lord's like, when you serve me, you're going to be taken care of, right? You don't need a land for an inheritance because the Lord is their inheritance. But is that Old Testament? I'm not sure.
Um, Hold on. I think I'm looking Deuteronomy 18 says
18 verse 1 and
the
2.
Levit yeah, the Levitical priests, all the tribe of Levi shall have no portion or inheritance with Israel. They shall not eat the Lord's food offering as their inheritance. They shall have no inheritance among their brothers. The Lord is their inheritance as he has promised them.
There you go.
Yeah. So again,
Any,
like I said, like they didn't get
It's
anything. They had
Deuteronomy.
to work.
does
Yeah.
anybody know? Does anybody know? Before we move on, past verse 10, has anybody ever thought to ask the question why 10%?
I mean, because Abraham
I
did
was
it.
thinking about that actually
No, no,
because
no, no. I'm saying
there's
why
12
did Abraham even do
tribes.
that?
I mean,
Where
that's
did
more
that come
than
from?
100% if they all donate.
Maybe because it's just easy to do 10 and not like 7.395.
Yeah, I'm just thinking like why 10? Why not 5? Why not 15? Like, is there any specific reason why it goes back to
I
10?
think it just had to go over 100%
Yeah, why
basically.
not 50? Why not half?
Because nine would be what 98, and 8 would be 96. So 10 would put you at well, no, 9
There's 12 tribes.
would
It's
be
like,
nine. Yeah, so 9 would put you over still. That put you
But this is even
yeah.
before that. This is even before Moses and the old covenant. Like Abraham gave a tenth. Like this is even before you get to the law and all that. Why did he do a tenth instead of like and not a different? I just wonder if there's any kind of significance.
1% for every commandment. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, there's no like again, this is all before that, right?
yeah,
Before
the Ten Commandments aren't even given.
Yeah, I was just
Mm.
thinking about. I mean, maybe there's no way for us to know. I just thought like, where did that number even come from? You know?
Yeah.
Okay.
But yeah, so I guess we can maybe move on, I guess maybe.
Yeah. What's the next section here? 11 through.
The rest of the chapter maybe.
I don't know. It's pretty
It
long.
might
It's
have been
28.
because that's the minimum count too, because their number system was didn't have a zero. I don't think. I think it just went to 1, 2, 3, 4. So 1 would have been the least amount that you could give potentially.
Um. I guess y'all want to go through 19, 11 through 19. Maybe
Sounds
that's the
good.
next section. Anybody want to read?
Yeah, I can read. Let's see. The people were given the law under the system of priests from the tribe of Levi, but no one could be made spiritually perfect through that system of priests. So there was a need for another priest to come. I mean, a priest like Melchizedek, not Aaron. And when a different kind of priest comes, then the law must be changed too. We're talking about our Lord Christ, who belonged to a different tribe. No one from that tribe ever served as a priest at the altar. It is clear that Christ came from the tribe of Judah, and Moses said nothing about a priest belonging to that tribe. And these things become even clearer when we see that another priest has come who is like Melchizedek. He was made a priest, but not because he met the requirements of being born into the right family. He became a priest by the power of the life that will never end. This is what the scriptures say about him. You are a priest forever, the kind of priest Melchizedek was. Excuse me. The old rule is now ended because it was weak and worthless. The law of Moses could not make anything perfect, but now a better hope has been given to us, and with that hope we can come near to God.
Well,
Amen.
I definitely noticed some different things in the translations. So I guess depending on what translations people are using on that section, people could
Mhm.
definitely have some different interpretations.
I think the one of the fascinating things here was verse 11. It says, "If therefore perfection have been reached by the Levitical priesthood," or in the ESV it reads, "Now if perfection had been obtainable through the Levitical priesthood, for under it the people received the law, what further need would there have been for another priest to arise after the order of Melchizedek?" This whole part for under it, meaning the Levitical priesthood, the people receive the law.
Mhm.
So the Torah, the whole system of the book of Leviticus, the whole, what you want to say, 613 laws and commandments and ordinances,
Mhm.
that was given under the Levitical priesthood.
Yep.
Yeah, and if
And
there wasn't a change, then why would you even need to have Christ come on the scene?
Well, there's no.
If the law was still here, then you wouldn't need Christ to come on the scene, really.
yeah,
Well,
it
yeah,
seems like,
the Messiah has to come at some point if he hasn't, because according to this, there's no perfection in that system, right?
yeah, it was just a shadow, Hebrews 10, but, or like with the sacrifices and things of that nature. But it just seems to me, it's like, well, then verse 12 says, "But as there is a change," and that Greek word literally means like a transfer. You know, like it's literally this changing. It's this translating, this transporting, or whatever that it's doing away with to a degree. And once
Well,
that's done away with, that law is gone. Like there's no need
what law
for
was
the people of
changed
God.
though, or is it just the priesthood that changed?
Well,
So
I
this is
think
what's interesting.
yeah.
It's connected because look how it says here. It says, "For under it the people received the law." So in my idea, like the sin of the golden calf, that whole thing, that introduced the the Levites to stand up for Yahweh, to bridge that gap. Because if you remember, Moses says to the children of Israel, who's going to stand for Yahweh? And it was the Levites that stood up. And then they were the ones that killed the people that partook in the sin of the golden calf when they drank that liquid with the grounded up golden calf and their stomachs got all whatever bloated or they got sick or something like that. And then if you keep reading, in my personal opinion, like all those other added commandments were connected or they were contingent upon this Levitical priest system.
Weren't they all supposed to be priests?
Yeah, Exodus chapter 19, it says, you know, for Moses is it's like, hey, you're going to be a royal, a nation or a kingdom of royal priest. Or let me just look at it real quick. I know it's
Yeah,
verse 5.
yeah. I know it was Exodus 19. You're to be unto me a kingdom of priests.
Kingdom of priests, that's what it is. And what's
Yeah.
fascinating is that phrase, a kingdom of priests, right? It's only found. I'm looking at my notes here. This is a long time ago I wrote this. I don't know why I wrote here Revelation 1:6, but that's just referencing that there was another priest system. Let me I have to do a little bit more research, but I'm not going to do that right this second. But what's fascinating is that connection of those Hebrew words or even Greek words is not found anywhere else in the entire Bible except in the New Testament in 1 Peter 2:9.
Of
Now,
course.
Andrew, what does that say?
Uh, he made us a royal nation, holy priesthood, people,
And,
God's own possession.
yeah, and I think that's where it's used twice. Let me see. First, is it first? It's I said 1 Peter. Yeah, 1 Peter 2. I want to say like
Yeah.
verse like 5 says something.
Verse
Yes,
9.
that's it right there. That's it. Verse 5 and 9.
5 and
So it's
9.
literally it's only used 3 times in the entire Bible. This right here. I'm gonna pull it up right now. Hold on. Verse 5 says, this royal priesthood, Strong's number 24. What is it? 2406. There's only 2 references, and it's literally in 1 Peter 2:5 and verse 9. And let me see here real quick. In verse 9, it's also used, yep, right there, a royal priesthood. And what's fascinating is that it's in the Greek Septuagint, it's used right here. So what I'm trying to make the connection is that you have this introduction to this royal priesthood, this heavenly priesthood, this kingly priesthood that was supposed to be given to all 12 tribes. But then something happens. God takes that away. Levi steps into place. God changes his mind, gives Levi this instead of the firstborn, all Israel. And then when you get into the new covenant, now with this changing of the law, now Jesus is the high priest in the order of Melchizedek. Now he has us being a part of that same priesthood that was originally found in Exodus chapter 19. I always
Is
thought
it
that was
is it more of
fascinating.
a not, because some people might say, okay, well, the law can't be changed, but is it more of like a change back to what the law was intentionally?
I mean, to a degree, but God does change. For example, in Numbers chapter 3, if you go there real fast, he says this multiple times. Yahweh says, I'm going to go really quick. Numbers chapter 3. If you look at verse 12, 41, 45, and I also believe it's in Numbers chapter 8, if my memory serves me well. Yeah, Numbers 8, verse 16 and 18. You have all those verses that I just mentioned. literally says that it says in Numbers chapter 3, verse 12, it says, "And I, behold, I have taken Levi from the midst of the sons of Israel in the place of, or instead of, the firstborn opening a womb from the sons of Israel." You have 41. "You shall take the Levites for me, I am Yahweh, instead of every firstborn among the sons of Israel." Verse 45. "Take the Levites instead of all the firstborn." Numbers chapter 8, verse 16. "For they are wholly given to me from among the sons of Israel, instead of," number 18, 8:18. "And I take the Levites instead of the firstborn." So you have this, well, wait a second, God. Why are you saying instead of? What happened? Wasn't your original plan to make all 12 tribes? Instead of having a nation of royal priests, you now have a nation with a priest. But it's not until the new covenant where you kind of see this change where now everybody in Christ, they're connected to this priesthood. They are a part of this royal priesthood because they have been joined to the high priest, Jesus, through baptism, obviously.
God's laws can change, but his nature doesn't change. Right? That's the difference, right? Like we don't do animal sacrifices today. That was something commanded under the law, right? Dietary restriction law, circumcision, et cetera, right? So those things have changed, but not God's nature, right? God's nature doesn't change, even those laws change. And he said it'd be different. Is it Jeremiah 31? The new covenant will not be like the covenant that I made with their fathers. So
yeah, it'll be different.
Yeah, it's going to be different. Is it because of Exodus 32, by the way, with the whole golden calf thing? Is that what initiated the change?
I mean, that's that's how I see it. Because what's fascinating is when you look at Exodus 32, and starting in verse 26, well, verse 25, "And Moses saw the people that they were naked, for Aaron had let them naked for scornful shaming among their enemies." And verse 26 says, "And Moses stood in the gate of the camp and said, Who is for Yahweh? Come to me. And all the sons of Levi assembled to him." So, like, this is pretty interesting. And then you have, "And the sons of Levi did according to the word of Moses, and about 3,000 men of the people fell to it." That's verse 28. And then verse 29, "And Moses said, Fill your hand today for Yahweh, since each one has been against his son and against his brothers, in order to give you a blessing today." So it's like, well, what type of blessing was Levi given? I mean, it doesn't say the priesthood, but it seems to me that this is the priesthood. There's another place. My memory is not perfect with this whole topic again. But it's Aaron's priesthood. This is Aaron's thing.
Exodus 40.
Exodus 40.
Well, I know it talks about the consecration of Aaron and his sons perpetually, I think.
I'm gonna just type this in real quick.
Yeah, Exodus 40 talks about
what verse?
Verse 12. "Bring Aaron and his sons to the entrance." Talks about washing them with water, anointing them with the garments and the tunics and all those things. And it says that they may serve me as their priests. Their anointing will be a priesthood that will continue throughout their generations, or perpetually. Some generations, or some translations.
Yeah.
By the way, Lori will probably like that typology, or that foreshadowing, where 3,000 people died on that occasion, and then the day the gospel was preached, the day the new covenant was preached, 3,000 were saved. Like that typology.
Yeah, it just confirms it, in my opinion.
I'm gonna look it up real quick.
That's important, though. Hebrews 7:11, showing that the law in that verse is talking about the old covenant law. because verse 12 says there's an altering or a changing over from the law, right? Alteration, removal.
Well, it says because there was a change in the priesthood, there had to be a change in the law.
Yep. That's
I
probably a
mean, that
verse.
might have been hard for them to handle.
Well, we know that we know it was. Look at everywhere the Apostle Paul went, he was being labeled a false teacher, a false apostle. Everywhere he went, everywhere he goes, he's having to defend his apostleship. People saying he's a false teacher. Paul, you read Galatians and other letters that he writes, he talks about people who are troubling him and troubling the Christians he's writing to, just trying to deceive you, drag you,
Well,
bring
in their
you into
mind,
bondage.
only Aaron's descendants could be, priests now. The ability for anyone to be a priest.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, I don't think anybody today knows who's from Aaron and who's not, right? So,
Right. It get harder and harder as time goes on.
Oh yeah, actually I found it. Numbers 18:1. It says, "So the Lord said to Aaron, you and your sons and your father's house, you with you shall bear iniquity connected with with the sanctuary, and you and your sons you shall bear iniquity connected with your priesthood." So it's kind of like, this is your thing, Aaron. And I don't know.
the NIV actually says your sons alone, you and your sons alone are to bear the responsibility. So the word alone is even in there in some translations.
Yeah, and look at the Brenton. Yeah, yours. Yeah, I mean, it's definitely fascinating. This whole, this is another big reason why I kind of got out of the Hebrew roots. I have like a whole, it's a whole bunch of stuff about the priesthood, the Levitical, the Melchizedek priesthood. The book of Hebrews is what really got me. Because just this passage, just changing in the priesthood, like, wait a second, that can't happen. Like, even what Rob said, God doesn't change, but this clearly is a change. But it's kind of like, also what you said, Rob, is it's kind of reverting back to the original to a degree.
Right. Yeah. It's not
Going
obviously
back
just
to,
the all of Israel. It's all of everybody, and everybody's Israel now.
Yeah, like we're Jesus is like the true Israel of God. Like he's the real deal, and then now we're connected with him, which makes us, the Israel of God.
I think it gets back
So
to Matthew's book a little bit, that Jesus did, take place of everyone and anyone that, anyone can be a partaker now of Christ, because he did replace Israel, however you want to look at that, to a degree.
yeah, no,
Not
for
necessarily
sure.
replace. He was Israel from the
Yeah.
get-go.
He relived Israel. Where Israel failed, Jesus succeeded.
When it says when the priesthood is altered, that Greek word meta,
What phrase?
verse 12, for whenever the priesthood is, some translations say altered, others say,
Is that Strong's 3346?
3572. Yeah, Strong's is 3346.
Yeah.
So some would say it means to transfer. Transfer. So that kind of makes me think of is it Genesis 49:10? The scepter shall not depart from Judah until Shiloh comes. So it's like a transferring of power from the priesthood, right?
Well, so you went from 12 tribes to 12 apostles, or 12 disciples, however you want to look at it. You know what I mean? There seems to be a transfer as well there.
Yeah, and we were talking on here one night about I can't remember what it was, but Matthias replacing Judas, and we were talking about somebody being replaced. I can't remember. Like I don't know if we're talking about Ephraim getting the blessing over Manasseh, or because Levi not being counted. Uh, the other ones were like we
There
were
was
talking about
somebody else. No, it was Reuben.
Reuben.
Lost his,
Okay.
Well, it
Reuben
says,
said he
what I'm
knew.
reading here, it says the tribes are named after 10 of Jacob's sons, all except for Joseph and Levi. Joseph's two sons, Ephraim and Manasseh, are named as the final two tribes. Levi is not named as one of the 12 tribes of Israel. However, Levi is the tribe of the chosen, set apart from the others as God's tribe.
Same as Joseph, right? Joseph was a type of Christ, so he doesn't have a tribe.
When it talks about the 144,000 in the book of Revelation, does it? I know it's like 12,000, and it lists the different tribes. Is Levi mentioned in that listing of the 12 there?
No, he's not. They're not.
Okay.
But you know what? You can go, we went through that, remember, and you could see that some people interpreted it differently. The scriptures aren't exactly clear on that. Like you'd have to really put some time into studying it, for sure.
So verse 14 is perfectly clear that our Lord is descended from Judah. Regard to that tribe, Moses said nothing about priests. I guess just goes to show that if I don't understand how anybody can be of the view that some people hold, that they accept Jesus as the Messiah, but they still want to hold on to keeping the old covenant. I don't understand how you can. I don't know how that works in people's minds. Really don't. Yeah, Revelation 7:2-8. That's the it lists the different of the 12,000 from each tribe. Revelation 7:3-8.
I mean, it's definitely a fascinating topic when it comes to like the Hebraic root stuff. I mean, I feel a lot of the times people aren't fully equipped with what the New Testament says. Like somebody like me, like I was just like, all right, I'm gonna start reading the Bible, and then I started hearing this Hebrew root stuff, and I was like, wow, I'm reading Genesis. Wow, this kind of makes sense. Oh yeah, wow, look at that. And then you kind of just like erase the name Israel. You don't really understand the covenants. You just kind of like see this idea of God's people. Also, if God's people in the old covenant, and we're God's people now, and we're all God's people. God told his people in the old covenant to do this, live their life like this, and God never changes. So it's the same thing. And then you go to the New Testament, and you're like, wow, look, the apostles are keeping the Sabbath. Oh, look, Peter still isn't eating unclean meats. You're just like,
Yeah,
wow, that makes a lot of sense.
except
Peter does
except
say,
he was told to arise, kill, and eat. Right?
yeah, but what's fascinating is Peter says, but Lord, I've never eaten anything.
Mm-hmm.
So you're like, wait a second. So even being a Christian in the new covenant for 7 years, you've still never eaten a pork chop.
Oh yeah, well think about it. There were no Gentiles in the church for like the first 7 years. You know, I
I
mean,
get it, but it's
yeah.
just kind of like when you really don't know too much and you hear that, you're like, wait a second, that is an interesting thing. Like you would
Mhm.
think like, oh, you're a Christian, here's Sunday.
You
It's
can take that even further back, Zach, right back to Genesis when, when you think of that church, what's it called? Seventh-day Adventist, right? And they
yeah,
talk
the
Mhm.
about
vegetarians.
vegetarianism.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
So I guess
I don't know what they do with those New Testament scriptures, like where Paul says, nothing is to be rejected as long as it's given thanks for. Like, was it First
The thing
Timothy
is,
7:2?
yeah, but the thing is what they'll do is because in that verse or in that passage, it said like what's been sanctified by like the word or something like that. So you're like, okay, where in the word has food been sanctified? Leviticus 11. Sanctified just means set apart. So what has been given for food? That's what they say.
Well, Jesus tells, or we're told when Jesus was here, it said
Yeah,
that
declared all
he
foods
declared all
clean.
foods clean, right? It's nothing,
Yeah,
nothing that enters the person's mouth that can defile the person.
yeah. So again, in the Hebrew roots mind, you'd be like, okay, well, Jesus is a Jew. What is he saying is food? He's not calling rattlesnakes food. He's calling food food. So like that's the mindset, is that historically speaking, into the first century Jewish audience, when you mentioned food, pork never crossed your mind.
So
Food was food.
why would he have to declare all foods clean if all foods in their mind already just meant the foods that were already clean?
Well, Hebrew roots would debate the topic of, well, what's actually being discussed in this passage. It's not it's eating clean food that God prescribed as food, and it's not even it's just eating food with unwashed hands. So Jesus is rebuking the Jewish leadership for their hypocrisy, because they are setting a rule that God never actually established, of
So
this
they
washing your
would
hands.
argue that when Jesus says it's not what enters the man's mouth that defiles the man, because what enters in passes through the stomach and is emptied out, whatever, they think that's about people's hands going in their mouths.
No, so what they would say is that because what the Jews were arguing, that, oh, your disciples are defiling themselves, or they're eating food with unclean hands, that was a violation of Torah, but it actually doesn't. It doesn't matter how you eat your food, as long as, if, I guess, because again, like in the Jewish tradition, customs, or whatever, I guess even if you're going to eat a clean food, lamb chops, steak, things of that you have to do that ritual in order to make your hands now holy and acceptable to eat that food, where there's none of that mentioned in the Torah.
I mean, there's nothing from outside of man that enters him that is able to defile him. That seems pretty clear.
It can kill you.
Yes.
So that
Yes.
means defiled spiritually, right? Obviously.
Yeah, for
Well,
sure.
I mean, if you think about it, according to the old covenant, it did defile you. There was things that messed
Yes,
you up.
in the old covenant,
So
yes.
in the old
Mhm.
covenant, yeah. So it's kind of like the idea is Jesus changing the law right then and there, like completely doing away with entire chapters of Leviticus? Or is
Yes.
he still upholding the law, and the law doesn't change until a little bit after? Because again, there are many times where Jesus is upholding, he's going to the feast days. I mean, he's practicing the Shabbat. He's telling people, hey, go offer gifts according to the law of Moses.
I
So
think once that temple comes down, it's finished.
yeah, it's finished. I agree. But it's not even
Right?
until, I mean, it's like, what, like, so was it like a stack of like Jenga, or however you say that game, where like when Jesus came on scene, he's anointed as the priest by John the Baptist. Like,
Mhm.
is he right there taking out parts of the Torah,
I
like
mean,
right then and there?
he already supersedes it. He already has more authority than it, right? Like he says, you heard it
Well,
said, but I say to you.
yeah, but see, the thing is a lot of time, what a Hebrew roots person would say in that area is that Jesus is not rebuking himself in the law, because the law is what Jesus gave to the children of Israel. It's that what Jesus is rebuking is their traditions based around those verses. That's why he says, "You've heard it been said, not it is written." So again, everything that the Jews made their traditions, it was like, how in the law it says, do not add or do not take away.
Mhm.
What the Jews did was they added so much fences, or like, for example, eating foods that were not kosher, if you want to use that terminology. They went so far is that you have to make sure you wash your hands properly. You have to say a prayer properly. You can't mix certain foods together. It just makes it such a more burdensome. But the commandment was just don't eat, animals that, don't have a split hoof and don't chew the cut, things of that nature. But the Jews added so much. So even though you look at those passages where Jesus is kind of saying in Matthew chapter 5, you've heard it been said, but I say to you, and then like you can see in your Bible, oh, that's a reference to Leviticus this or Deuteronomy that or Exodus this. It's just like, okay, well, everything that the Jews were doing had its original basis in the law. It's just that they added to those things. And that's what Jesus is rebuking over and over and over again. Like not to heal on the Sabbath day, because there's no Torah commandment that says that. It's just that the Jews were just like so wrapped in their mind. They're like, hey, you can't do any of these things. You can't, the Bible says don't kindle a fire, but like they're adding like, hey, you can't freaking walk a certain distance, you can't do this, you can't do that. So that's kind of like the idea. But I've always thought like with this whole food thing, is Jesus changing it then, or does it change like when the new covenant takes in effect?
I mean, when he says like in Matthew's account, Matthew 15,
Yeah, Matthew 15. Yeah.
It's also Mark 7, but Matthew 15
Mark 7.
specifically, verse 17 says, "Do you not understand that everything that goes into the mouth passes through the stomach and is expelled into the latrine?"
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
you eat it and
sounds,
you poop it out.
that sounds like he's not just talking about, traditions with hand washing.
No, because the idea is, God, what the Jews thought that would happen is that if you did not do this ritual ceremony, that your unwashed hands and being in that like unclean state with your hands would now defile that food. And then that clean food that God allowed you to eat now made you like if you ate a pork chop.
And in the last verse there it does say, but to eat with unwashed hands does not defile anyone. So that could be the potential subject.
Yeah, that's kind of like the Hebrew roots thing. And like I said, dude, I'm not saying that this is like, I believe I can eat pork, but I don't read Matthew 7:15 and go, okay, I can eat pork now. Because the idea is Peter was standing, and this is another Hebrew roots tactic. Peter was standing there during that conversation, correct?
Yeah, I think so.
When did
Yeah, it
Acts
says what
chapter
Peter
10
said to
take
him.
place?
So yeah.
Like
when did Acts 10
7 to 12 years after Pentecost?
Yeah, and Peter still has not eaten any pork chops yet.
Yeah, that's the thing. Like we're looking back at this, like we understand that in God's eyes, this is done away with. But living in the moment when it's going on, they don't know that. For like they're learning.
No, but Peter, but Peter is given the inspiration of the Holy Spirit to reveal all truth.
Yeah, but he's not downloaded with everything all at once. Like he doesn't know what John's going to see in the Book of Revelation and stuff like that. Like they're getting all truth in piecemeal fashion. They're not all just instantly downloaded with everything right then and there on the spot. They're downloaded with everything they need at that particular time.
Correct. But he did hear Jesus state. So like when you read the words, you're like, obviously this is Jesus doing away with Leviticus 11. But Peter was standing there, and to him, he didn't get it.
Yeah, sure.
Jesus said the words in red end with, Jesus says what comes out of your mind or your mouth, whatever, that defiles you. But then he ends with, but to eat with unwashed hands is not defiling anyone. So to me, he was directly answering Peter's question.
And it says in Mark's account, thus he declared all foods clean.
Right, but if you have more information in another account, then you have to go with that.
Yeah, it's all the above, right? Like, it's all, it's not just one or the other.
But that, I remember, I think it was you that had said that thus he declared all foods clean. Like that's kind of like the author after the fact, understanding everything, kind of adding that in there. Like Jesus didn't say those.
Yeah, Jesus didn't say that. Mark, by inspiration, records that Jesus declares this. So it could be interpreted as at the time Mark is writing the letter to the audience he's writing to, which would have been after the cross, he's
Yeah.
letting them know all foods are clean. Like by this, and maybe they would have read that
Yeah.
by that point. So yeah, I see. Yeah.
So and so the idea is that the original audience, the original context, I don't necessarily think Jesus is doing away with Leviticus, but I think that it does add a little bit of weight to the overall like axe being laid ready to destroy the Levitical system. But in my mind, it wasn't until after.
Does he ever? Okay, all right. Let's ask a deeper question here. So, is there at any point that can we think of any point that Jesus did away with anything before the cross? Like, let's say he came on the scene, he fulfilled something, and therefore it's removed even before you get to the cross
I
because
know
he's
some
already
people
fulfilled
say the
something.
Sabbath, but that's about the only thing I can think of.
He did away with
No.
he defeated the devil in the wilderness.
Well, yeah, but
That's not like
That
a
wasn't a
Torah.
law per
yeah, but
se,
the night
though.
before he dies, he
Must
says
defeat.
now the ruler's cast out the night before he dies. So he wasn't cast out during the wilderness. He was just overcome.
So ask the question one more time. Say it
So
again.
did Jesus ever supersede anything and like fulfill anything and remove it before the cross?
Did he ever remove like
I mean,
any part of
obviously
the
there's some
law?
things, right? Like okay, the Messiah had to be born in Bethlehem. Obviously, Jesus didn't have to go get born again when he was 30 years old,
But-
right? Like,
But the question
yeah.
is, did he remove anything?
Like, did he fulfill anything and remove it before he got to the cross?
Well, like a Torah commandment. So, like, again, there's obviously prophecies that's only for Jesus, but like a person after they're healed, they're required to go offer a certain gift at the temple.
Mhm.
Well, Jesus tells them after they've been miraculously healed, oh, by the way, you still need to follow Moses.
Right.
You know,
Yeah,
Matthew
like,
chapter
yeah.
23, Jesus says to the crowd, he says, the scribes and Pharisees sit on Moses' seat. So whatever they say, do. But whatever they do, don't do. Well, what does it mean to sit on the seat of Moses? Well, in the synagogue, historically, there was a seat that when somebody were ever to read the words of Moses, you would sit right here. So Jesus is saying that when you hear Moses' words, you do that. But the Jews are going to not do that because of their oral tradition. So don't do as they do because they don't follow what Moses said. So that's another big Hebrew roots verse. You know, Jesus is literally saying, whatever Moses says, do it.
Right. There was a verse somewhere, I can't remember where it's at. I thought maybe in John 5. I think Matthew talked about it in his book that he wrote on Jacob and Esau, where it talks about Jesus broke the Sabbath or he broke something. Is that
Oh, well, I mean, obviously he didn't break the Sabbath because that would be a sin.
he also talks about, what was it, Matthew? Because another occasion is, I think, Matthew 12. The disciples are taking the heads of grain, and
Yeah, again, in Matthew 12, so in the Torah, like I can show you, in the Torah, it allows you to do that. So in Matthew chapter 12, because I just went through the book of Matthew and I like redid my notes and everything.
but verse 12, but in
So yeah,
chapter 12,
Deuteronomy,
yeah, but David,
Deuteronomy 23, no, Deuteronomy 23, verse 25 says,
it talks about they're allowed to go through the fields.
yeah,
And
it says, when they comest in amongst the standing corn of thy neighbor, I'm reading the King James, hold on. It says, if you go into your neighbor's standing grain, you may pluck the ears with your hand, but you shall not put a sickle to your neighbor's standing grain. Meaning you can't just go into your neighbor's land and start like reaping. Oh, I'm going to just put my sickle and I'm going to just reap this harvest. But if you're walking through the grain field, you can pluck with your hands and eat it.
okay, so you can eat, you just can't like work for the food.
Yeah, you just can't harvest. Like, you know, you're going to put bundles in a bag. Like that's why you would use a
What
sickle,
about
like
healing
to
on
reap.
the Sabbath?
Yeah, there's no commandment that says that you can't heal on the Sabbath.
Yeah, I know he talks about like if one of you had an ox or donkey, it falls in the pit.
Yeah, there's no commandment like that.
So, but he goes on to say in Matthew 12, he says, "Have you not read what David and those with him did when they were hungry? He entered the house of God. They ate the sacred bread, which was not lawful for him to eat, nor for those who were with him, but the priests alone. Or have you not read in the law that on the Sabbath the priests in the temple break the Sabbath and are not guilty?"
Yeah, because remember the priests, they're like a special class within Israel. They have to work because there's no day off for them. There are actual in the Torah, there are sacrifices that are done every Sabbath day. Well, who's officiating those sacrifices? The Levites. They're
Well, and didn't
technically
Jesus,
working, but just to throw this out there real quick, the Torah ultimate goal is to save life. So yes, technically there are certain laws that supersede it, but
yeah,
David was doing that in the Old Testament. If it had to do with like superseding life, then yes, life
that's what I
comes
was going to
before the
say.
commandment. But
Okay.
Because it
that's
doesn't,
not, but in
doesn't,
God's eyes, that's not breaking the commandment because the ultimate uh objective is life.
right. And Jesus
So
even
again,
said, that's what I was going to mention, the verse where Jesus said, go and learn what this means, that I will have mercy rather than sacrifice or something like that. So
Yeah,
because you're sacrificing, not working, so you enter into his rest, but well, if your neighbor's sheep or donkey, has fallen in a ditch, or when somebody needs help, what's the greater thing? Oh, I'm practicing my law. See, that's why I tried to argue with John Law and Rose. It's like the single red rose. Yeah, like, oh, we don't work on this day. Well, what if I said, well, what about people who work in the hospitals? And well, they have, a legitimate reason to, but well, what if you got to go to the store? Well, I mean, if your headache's really bad, remember Rob, Rob was asking him like a bazillion questions. Should I go get my glasses today? Or would that be a sin? It's like, we're not using common sense, which the heart of God is always greater. Isn't that right, Zach? Is that what you're saying?
yeah. So again, even with David, with Matthew, or with in the Matthew, what was brought up there in that passage, again, it was because David and his men were, I guess they were fleeing, and they were inside the temple, and it was the show bread, that bread that's inside inside the first veil, that
Mm-hmm.
bread is only for the Levites. However, because of the situation and them needing food,
Yep.
it wasn't necessarily like you have to take the weightier matters of the law.
that's
Right.
There.
that's also in you can see that I think with Joseph and Mary. It says Joseph was a righteous man and put
But
right, like
David
he
was
did
also a priest king, wasn't he?
yeah.
I
Because
don't know if he
Jesus
was a
is
priest
after
king, but
I don't know if he was a king
the
at that
throne
point or
of
not.
no,
David.
no, I don't see David as a priest. Some people do, but I mean, even right here, it should have been fine for him to eat the bread then. But what were you saying about Joseph and them?
Yeah, so remember, so according to the law, Joseph was probably thinking he could have had Mary stoned,
Well, that's
right?
the argument they make, that it was okay
But
that
Yeah,
they ate the bread.
but the Bible says he was a just man or a righteous man, right? Because he was doing the greater, like you said, he was mercy, compassion, faithfulness, like right. He
yeah,
didn't want to have her
hmm
stoned, so it refers to him as righteous, even though he
yeah.
within the law could have, he would have thought could have had her stoned, but he chose to
Oh,
show compassion and mercy, right?
Because
exactly.
because
So,
one is the letter of the law, that which is written, which letter kills, right? If you obey it verbatim like that. But the other is the law of a priest. Before you can become a priest, you have to have the heart of God. That's the heart of compassion. So see, King David, if you see, there's other stories I think in the Old Testament talk about like where they're breaking the laws, but they're not actually. They're because they're obeying a higher law, which is actually after the order of a Melchizedek, right? King and
and
priest. Like if you act like
and
a king has the authority to just say off with his head, right? The queen, off with their heads. I want all the red.
that's funny.
I want all the black hearts painted red. Anyway,
So, and actually, there is a Greek word here in Matthew 23:23 where it mentions the heavier matters of the law, or the
there we
weightier
go.
matters.
Yeah.
And it
Hmm.
says, and there the mercy and the belief is necessary, or The ESV just says the weightier matters of the law, justice and mercy and faithfulness.
Yeah. Because
So like I can
only,
see that those things are just they weigh more. So again, like when people bring up these passages that Jesus, so again in my mind, Jesus is living a perfect life, meaning he was, and again, Galatians chapter 4, he was born under the law. He had to follow the law perfectly.
Another
Up and
thing that Jesus would
so
bring to them when they would accuse him of breaking certain laws, he would appeal to in the beginning. So he even goes back before Moses' law, before the Ten Commandments, before the law of Moses was given. He sometimes he appeals even back, but before that, this was not so. See, because Moses' law had to become written, for various reasons, but in order to point out sin in us was, the major one. But it's not to say that it was ever not so from the beginning. It's just that, it's like when you're dealing with unruly children, right? Sometimes you got to make a law for your kids that you don't necessarily have to make that same law for the other kids, because those kids don't have a problem. You know what I mean? They just, it's interesting. But yeah, he'll appeal even back to the beginning.
Yeah, like Romans 10 verse 4, Christ is the end of the law, I guess just there's different ways or different thoughts people have on what exactly that means about Christ being
yeah,
the end of the law.
in the Hebrew roots, they'll say, hey, listen, telos means goal or aim. He is what the law pointed to.
Mm-hmm.
So I mean, yes, I believe with the full revelation of God, obviously there is a change, and we just read it in Hebrews chapter 7. There is a change. Again, the Levites were the ones to receive this Levitical system, all that stuff. That stuff was added to the law. It was to be taken away. You go look at Galatians chapter 3, the law that was added, like that, there is a law added, and it's this whole Levitical system. You're going through the book of Exodus and all that stuff. Start waiting until you get to the understanding, and I think you were in chapter 24,
Yeah.
or if you,
Mm-hmm.
the
24.
book of the covenant. Go
Mm-hmm.
look up book of the covenant versus the book of the law. Go look up that. There is a difference there. And you can start, looking at, well, when did Moses receive the Levitical commandments? When was the book of Leviticus given? It says in Exodus, you're very good with Exodus right now. I haven't looked at it in a while, but at you get to like Exodus 34, they're writing a covenant again, right?
I hadn't got there, I'm assuming. I'm in 24.
Oh, that's
I'm
right.
looking up
Oh,
soon.
yeah, that's right. Okay. So in Exodus 34, they recut the covenant. And you're like, wait a sec. So have you done 24 yet?
No, I'm hoping to do 24 if I go to bed tonight.
Okay, because when you look at 24, you're going to look extremely at verses. Let me go back. 6 through 8, where it says, and Moses took half of the blood and he put it in the basins, and he sprinkled half of the
Yep.
blood on the altar, and he took the book of the covenant, read it in the ears of the people, and they said, we will do all that Yahweh has spoken, and we will hear. And Moses took the blood and sprinkled it on the people and said, behold, the blood of the covenant which Yahweh has cut with you concerning these words. And then that's when they go up and eat with Yahweh, right? But then you get to Exodus 34, and it says, and remember, this is when the golden calf happens in Exodus 32. You have Exodus 32, 33, and 34. It's pretty much Yahweh killing off the people and now saying, Moses, I'm going to deal with you. I'm killing everybody, actually, and I'm only going to have you. And Moses has to intercede. Like, I think 4 times he says that they're your people, Moses. Go see your people. So he's pleading with him in Exodus 32, verse 14. And Yahweh was moved to pity concerning the evil which he had spoken to do to these people. And then in verse 32 of the same chapter, and now This is Moses. And now, if you will lift up their sin, and if not, I pray, blot me out from your book which you have written. So this is him pleading. And in 33:13 says, and now, if I have found favor in your eyes, please make me see your ways and let me know you, so that I may find favor in your eyes, and consider that this nation is your people. You know, and it's fascinating. It's really fascinating. I want you to really pay attention to these chapters, because you're going to go through it again during your awesome study there. But how God changes it from his people to Moses's people. So, for example, Exodus 33 verse 1, it says, and Yahweh spoke to Moses, come up from this place, you and the people whom you have caused to go up out of the land of Egypt.
Yeah, they already broke the covenant with the golden
Yes.
calf, right? They already broke it.
They broke in Exodus 24. They all said, we will do it, God. Everything. And Moses sprinkles the blood. Okay, you said I do. You said I do. You guys are married. Praise the Lord. We're going to go eat our marriage supper. We're going to go do our thing. This covenant has just been cut. It's been ratified by the blood. The book of the covenant is our witness. Boom, we're doing it. Boom. 40 days later, broken. And so God's done with them. I'm killing all of them. I'm going to start with you, Moses. So Moses pleads with him over and over and over again. And then Exodus 34 comes around, and look at this. In verse 9, it says, and he said, if now I have found favor in your eyes, O Yahweh, please let my Lord go in our midst, for it is a stiff-necked people, and you forgive our iniquity and our sins, and take us as a possession. So again, that's the fourth time, and I have another one, but there's 4 times Moses pleads with Yahweh, saying the same similar thing. Then verse 10, and he said, Yahweh, behold, I am cutting a covenant. I will do wonderful things before all your people, which have not been done on all the earth, and among all the nations and all the people in whose midst you are and you shall see the work of Yahweh, and of that which I am about to do is awesome. And then what's fascinating is if you read from 11 all the way through to 26, all these commandments that are given are the exact same commandments from Exodus 20 through 23.
Yeah, it says
That
in verse
same
1, the verse 34:1, I will write them, I will chisel out 2 stone tablets like the first ones. I will write on them the words that were on the first tablets.
Yeah, so now Yahweh is now cutting another covenant with the children of Israel, right? And what's fascinating is it's when he it comes down to that when you get to verse 27, and Yahweh said to Moses, write these words for yourself, for on the mouth of these words I will cut a covenant with you and with Israel. And you're like, wait a second, dude, you already did this in Exodus 24. What are you doing again? And then this is when Moses is going up and down on the mountain. His face is shining. You know that whole scenario there?
Yeah.
In
yeah.
verse 35, it says, and the sons of Israel would see the face of Moses, and the skin of Moses' face would shine, and Moses would put back the veil on his face until he went in to speak with him. And then all of a sudden, you have Exodus 35 through 39. What's happening here? It's just a bunch of the tabernacle descriptions, the size, the branches, the gate, the incense, the altar. It's just all this descriptive information, right? Then boom, Exodus chapter 40 on verse 1. And Yahweh spoke to Moses, saying, on the first day of the month, on the first of the month, you shall rise in the tent of the tabernacle. And you have all this information about when you're going to establish this tabernacle. Verse 17 says, and it happened on the first of the month in the second year. So the second year passed already. But if you read from when they leave Egypt to when you start reading these covenant things, it's not years have gone by. A year has gone by. It seems like 2 40-day periods have gone by. Like they traveled, they went to Mount Sinai. I mean, it wasn't like a long waiting period. And then boom, all of a sudden it's a second year has gone by because they were building the tabernacle. But what's interesting is if you read Leviticus, you're going to start seeing towards the end of the book, where did Moses receive these commandments in the book of Leviticus? Leviticus chapter 25, verse 1 says, "And Yahweh spoke with Moses on Mount Sinai, saying," wait a second. So Leviticus, Yahweh is still speaking to Moses on Mount Sinai? Leviticus 26, verse 46. "These are the statutes and the judgments and the laws which Yahweh has given between him and the sons of Israel in Mount Sinai by the hand of Moses." Whoa.
Hang on,
These
I just read
commandments?
about. I just read this. Verse 3 and 4. The 6 years sowing the land, and the 7th year the land has a Sabbath rest. I just read that. That's Exodus 23.
Say it again. My headphones just died.
So Leviticus 25, 3 and 4 talks about the 6 years sowing the land, and the land gets a Sabbath on the 7th year.
Yeah.
I just read that in Exodus 23.
Yeah, so those commandments are reiterated for sure.
But this is
I
the
want
Lord.
to bring up something else about the law, because I want to see what you guys say about it, because I haven't really studied it. I just know that it's in the back of my mind. But it's about the law. It's okay. So I found it in Deuteronomy 31. I guess to narrow down the verse, and verse 26. Okay, so God has already told Moses, here's the tablets.
Yeah, book of the
Yeah,
law.
here's the tablets. Put them in the ark. So we know that
Besides,
this is a book that Moses, when he finished writing this book of the law, to put it in the side of the ark. I was trying to find it because I thought it said to hang it on the outside, and I didn't have the right word search, but it says put it in the side of the ark of the covenant of the Lord your God, that it may be there for a witness against thee. Oh, doesn't that sound like what? So speak. Can you speak to that at all?
Does that go back to the fact of Exodus 24? It's like a witness that you've already broken the covenant.
So the way that I understand this is so we've understood that Exodus 24, they broke that commandment. Exodus 32, Yahweh gives these other added commandments. Like again, I just showed you in the book of Leviticus, and the last verse of the book of Leviticus is, "These are the commandments which Yahweh has commanded Moses for the sons of Israel on Mount Sinai." Then you get to then you get to Numbers chapter 1, verse 1. It says, "And Yahweh spoke to Moses in the wilderness of Sinai in the tabernacle of the congregation on the first of the second month in the second year." So if you think about it, that is only 1 month after Exodus chapter 40, verse 17. So it's like we kind of think this chronological order of the book of the Bible, but it's not. It's going back and forth. It's not put together in that perfect order.
Did the whole book of Leviticus take place with Moses on Mount Sinai?
Yeah, I would say in Exodus 34, when it keeps talking about Moses would go and his face would shine. He had to put the veil over his face, but he would take the veil off when he would go speak to Yahweh. Well, what was he speaking with Yahweh over and over again? That he would have to take the
whole book of Leviticus?
The whole added law of Leviticus, exactly.
Yeah.
And now this is the interesting thing. I also believe that the book of Numbers shows us that the covenant was broken again with the sin of the spies when they forsake the land.
Is that with Korah's rebellion? The ground opens up and all that? That's number 16. That's number 16, right?
This is your favorite, the age of accountability kind of stuff.
Numbers 14 or 24.
Yeah, this is when Yahweh, when the children of Israel are like, oh, it's better for us to have gone back to Israel or back to Egypt because Yahweh's brought us out here for our children to die. Right? And Yahweh's like, okay, you know what, you sons of bitches? I'm killing y'all, and the children which you said were going to become a prey, I'm going to let them come into the land. They're going to be the inheritance of the promise. You guys all going to die, except Joshua and Caleb. So again, the original people that received the second covenant in Exodus 34 that Yahweh cut with the children of Israel a second time, those people, God says, you know what? I am killing y'all off. I gave you some grace. I wasn't going to kill you, but now screw it. I'm going to let y'all wander around for 40 years. I'm going to kill y'all off. I'm going to let your children are going to know. Because in verse 29 of Exodus or of Numbers 14 says, your dead body shall fall in this wilderness, even all your numbered sons. As to the whole number from 20 years old and upward, in that you have murmured against me. You
There you
shall
go.
certainly not come into
See-
the land which I lifted my hand to cause you to live in, except Caleb and Joshua.
But do
And
you see
as
what's
for your,
happening here? They murmured in disbelief. See,
yeah,
this
of
goes back
course.
to, again, it goes back to your thoughts manifest your, so did they fall in the wilderness because God cursed them? No, they
No,
cursed
they cursed
themselves
God. No, they
because,
cursed God
yeah,
because they had said that God brought us in the
yeah,
first part of the chapter. It says, and all the congregation lifted up their voice and cried, and the people wept during the night. And all the sons of Israel murmured against Moses and against Aaron. And all the
yeah,
congregation said to them, oh, that we had died in the land of Egypt or in this wilderness. Oh, that we have died. And why
yeah.
is Yahweh bringing us into a land to fall by the sword? Our wives and our children have become a prey. Is it not good for us to return to Egypt? And they said to each to his brother, let us give a leader and return to Egypt. So they
Now,
are now rejecting
doesn't
Yahweh's
this sound like,
chosen vessel.
doesn't this sound like in the New Testament where it talks about those who have tasted of the world to come and yet basically reject and go back? Because how is it that the son of God be crucified again for them? So it's
Mhm.
almost like it's talking about the where is it? I can't think, but it's like talking
Hebrews
about
6.
the unpardonable sin. Like it's
Matthew
almost
12.
like that's what they committed out here in the wilderness because they've been brought out of Egypt, place of slavery. Yeah, I mean the road's not perfect, but God is supplying all their basic needs, and they're seeing miracles, and yet this is the human nature. We still grumble. Like it's disgusting. It's like we're never happy enough. It's never good enough. You
Yeah.
get it. You get a cool new truck, and then they come out with a the next year's model, and you got to have that. We just always want better and more and better. We're just, we don't stay content. I think that's why that's one of the 10 commandments is to be
Yeah,
So
and
be
you're saying
content.
Moses' face wasn't fading in the veil and all that. That didn't happen until after they had broken the covenant.
correct. It was not until the second set of tablets was made, Yahweh reinstitutes the same covenant that he already gave the children of Israel, but now he also adds the
Right.
entire Levitical system with the priesthood of Aaron, all the sin sacrifices. You won't find a sin sacrifice in Exodus 20, 21, 22,
You
23.
right.
There are
You
no
don't
sin
find anything about
sacrifices.
sin
Sin
sacrifices in the Ten
sacrifices are until
Commandments.
Leviticus, until
Mhm.
after the sin of the golden calf. And then again to your question earlier, you had mentioned, because I'm gonna have to go pretty soon because it's so super late. Deuteronomy 31 verses 24 through 26. So because I've just shown that covenant was broken in Exodus 32, that those people broke that covenant again in Exodus or in Numbers chapter 14. The book of Deuteronomy is literally another covenant that Moses cuts with the people again, but it's with the children. And to prove that is in Deuteronomy 29, verse 1. It says, these are the words of the covenant which Yahweh commanded Moses to cut with the sons of Israel in the land of Moab, besides the covenant which he made with them at Horeb. So you have both of these covenants coming in to the children of Israel, to this second generation. It's kind of like they added on top of each other. And then you have this book of the covenant, which was Exodus 20 through 23. That was like the main bulk of it. Then you have the book of the law, which was all the Levitical sin sacrifices. That was the witness against them. That was kind of
Yep.
like, hey, if you break this crap, I'll kill you just like I killed your parents. So it was all against them. It was all bad. And that's what I believe was wiped out of here. That's the change, going back to the Melchizedek priest system, you know, back to God's original intent with having all of his children being priests, not just a nation with a priest, but a nation of priests.
Well, and that's what, and they were supposed to be basically priests and witnesses to the rest of the nations, but they were so busy, you know, trying to deal with their own lives, deal with their own faith, deal with their own troubles, that they didn't take care of the rest of the nations. You know, they were too wrapped up in their own sins and rebellion and everything else that went on. They weren't really any good to the neighboring nations, and rather they took on the neighboring nations ways, you know, that God told them not to.
Now you
Right,
brought
goes back
up.
to taking their first earthly king.
So is there
You
like
know,
three different covenants? So there's like you're saying like there's like three different covenants cut.
Dude, there are 3 covenants cut with Moses and the children of Israel. You have the 10 Commandments. You have, well, technically it kind of goes into Exodus 24. Then you have Deuteronomy or Exodus 32 with 30 through
I
34.
think that
Then you have Numbers 14 with them breaking it into. So yeah, there's 3 covenants with Moses. There's 2 covenants with Abraham. But what's fascinating
there's a
is
covenant with Noah too.
yeah, there's a covenant with Noah. But what's fascinating is there's this another interesting factor is this idea of having my daughter's screaming her head off, so I'll have to go up really soon. There's this idea of Yahweh proposing something, the people accepting that proposal, blood sacrifice, meal. Think about with Abraham. Yahweh calls to Abraham, makes him a promise. Abraham accepts that promise. Abraham cuts his foreskin. There is a blood offering. He's going to also offer up Isaac. There's this offering on his part. And then Genesis chapter 18. What does Abraham do with Yahweh? He eats with him. So you have these 4 elements of this covenant. The next time you see that happening is in Exodus chapter 24. You have Yahweh proposing, even in Exodus 19. So Yahweh says, hey, I'm going to give them this offer, bring it back down to them. And the children of Israel will say, yes, all the words that Yahweh says, we're going to do it. So you have Yahweh proposing, you have Israel accepting, you have, again, Exodus 24, you have the blood that Moses sprinkles on the altar or on the basins, on the people, on the book. And then what happens next? They all eat. Well, the 70, Moses, Aaron, Nadab, Abihu, and the 70 elders, they see the God of Israel and they eat with him. What's fascinating is you don't see those 4 elements happening again in the Old Testament until you get to Jesus. What do we have with Jesus? Jesus gives them a proposal. You have them accepting it. You have the sacrifice of his body. What happens when Jesus resurrects? They eat with him. And you have all this stuff connecting
And you
these
also have
covenants together. That's the fulfillment of all of them. But yeah, with Moses, there are multiple covenants. There's breaking of the covenants. And also you have the Exodus 34 and the Deuteronomy covenants being combined and being stacked on upon each other. And that's what's the law being held going into the promised land, Joshua, through the book of Judges, through the Kings, and all that stuff. That's what they're following. This is what they find in Numbers or in Nehemiah. What did they read? What book did they find? They found the book of the law, the thing that was placed besides the Ark of the Covenant. They found Leviticus. They found the law. They found what they were supposed to be doing. But the new covenant does supersede that added law. Galatians chapter 4 or chapter 3 talks about the added law, all this stuff. So pretty much at the end of the day, the only thing that stands is the 10 Commandments in my book. And then there's an alteration of the Sabbath, obviously. But on that note, I gotta go. It's been 2 hours. I told myself I was only going to be here for like a half an hour.
Well, thanks
All
for
right.
coming, dude.
Hey, we're gonna pick up on chapter 7 I guess around verse 15, 16 where we left off.
Yeah, man. All right, y'all have a blessed night. Peace.
All right. I'll end the recording here. I guess we read through 19, I think, but we'll stop. We didn't really talk much about past 14 because we started getting into the old stuff, Old Testament stuff. So we'll pick up around 15 or 16 next time, I guess, in the recording here.
All right. Good night.